I heard the crash before I even made it to my morning coffee, a thunderous, gut-wrenching scrape of metal against concrete. Then, an ear-splitting honk blared, making my poor golden retriever, Buster, yelp and bolt under the kitchen table, his tail tucked between his legs. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I rushed to the front door, already bracing myself for the worst. And there she was. Brenda, our neighborhood's self-appointed queen bee, her pearl-white SUV wedged halfway onto my meticulously manicured lawn. The front bumper practically nuzzled my prize-winning rose bushes, as if they were on some romantic getaway. She stood outside, arms crossed over her chest, her face contorted in an expression of pure, unadulterated outrage, as if I had personally insulted her entire lineage. "What in the Sam Hill is this?" she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the low wooden fence I had put up just yesterday. "You blocked the shortcut. I've been using this driveway for months. Do you know how much time I lose by going the long way around?" I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. My driveway, my property, and she was yelling at me, as if I had vandalized her precious vehicle instead of the other way around. I took a deep breath, trying desperately to keep my voice level, but it wasn't easy. "Brenda," I began, my voice tight with forced calm, "this is my driveway, not a public road. You have absolutely no right to drive through here." She scoffed, waving her hand dismissively, her perfectly painted nails flashing in the morning sun, as if I were some insignificant insect buzzing around her. "That's ridiculous. The HOA allows it. Everyone knows this is the fastest way out of the neighborhood. Why are you being so difficult?" I resisted the overwhelming urge to laugh in sheer disbelief. "Brenda, the HOA doesn't own my property. I do. And I'm sick and tired of you treating my driveway like your personal speedway." Her expression darkened, the carefully applied makeup around her eyes seeming to tighten with fury. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a condescending whisper that dripped with venom. "Listen, sweetheart," she hissed, her breath smelling faintly of expensive perfume and something vaguely sour. "I don't care what little rules you think apply here. I've been living in this neighborhood for 15 years. You're just a newbie trying to change things. It won't work. This driveway has always been the shortcut, and it always will be." I clenched my fists, my knuckles turning white. This woman was unbelievable. I had been dealing with her nonsense for months. Seeing her car speed through my property, watching her tires tear up my gravel path without a second thought, having her dismiss every attempt I made to stop her. I had tried everything. I put up bright orange traffic cones. She simply moved them. I installed a small decorative gate. She knocked it over in the dead of night. I even sent crystal-clear security footage of her blatant trespassing to the HOA, only to be met with shrugged shoulders and muttered excuses. "Brenda's been here forever," they'd said, "we can't just change things now." And now, here she was again, acting like she had every right to be furious at me for finally putting an end to her free ride. "I'm calling the HOA," she snapped, pulling out her sleek smartphone with a dramatic flourish. "They'll deal with this." I laughed, but there was no humor in it, just a raw, simmering anger. "Go ahead, Brenda. Call them. Let's see how that works out for you." She narrowed her eyes, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line, then stomped back to her SUV and struggled to reverse out of my lawn, leaving deep, muddy tire tracks in her wake. I watched as she sped off, my blood boiling, my hands trembling with frustration. This wasn't just a battle over a driveway anymore. This was war. Later that afternoon, the HOA sent an email. A formal notice. Not for Brenda, for me. Subject: unauthorized modifications to community access pathways. Dear homeowner, we have received complaints regarding unauthorized modifications to community access pathways. The recent fence installation on your property has been deemed disruptive to neighborhood traffic patterns. We kindly ask that you remove it immediately to maintain community harmony. Sincerely, HOA Board. I stared at the screen, rage bubbling up inside me like a volcanic eruption waiting to happen. Unauthorized modifications? Community harmony? They were seriously siding with Brenda on this? I marched straight to the HOA office, determined to give them a piece of my mind. But the moment I walked in, I saw her. Brenda sat smugly in the corner, chatting with the board members like they were her long-lost best friends. She shot me a victorious smirk, as if she already knew how this was going to play out. "Ah, Mr. Johnson," the HOA president, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, said, barely glancing up from a stack of papers. "We were just discussing your, landscaping alterations." I crossed my arms, my jaw tight. "You mean the fence I put up to keep Brenda from illegally driving through my property?" A few awkward coughs echoed in the small office. A few nervous glances were exchanged between the board members. Then, one of them, a woman with a severe bun, spoke up. "It's just that, well, Brenda has been using that path for years. It's sort of a neighborhood tradition." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, let me get this straight. My property is apparently community property now? She has absolutely no right to use my driveway." Another nervous glance between the board members. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Well, technically, no. But nothing." I cut in, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "You're telling me she gets to destroy my lawn, endanger my family, and you're siding with her because of some ridiculous tradition?" Brenda gave a fake, saccharine laugh. "Oh, come on. It's just a little shortcut. You're being so dramatic." I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I could fight this all day and get nowhere. The HOA was clearly in Brenda's back pocket, and they weren't going to budge. It was time for a different approach. Something bigger. Something that would make absolutely sure she never set foot, or tire, on my property again. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the ruined stretch of grass where Brenda's SUV had torn through earlier. My mind raced with ideas. A taller fence? No, she'd probably find a way around it, or complain it blocked her view of the street. Motion sensors? She'd complain to the HOA about the intrusive technology. Maybe cameras with alarms? Better, but not quite dramatic enough. I needed something better. Something that would drive her absolutely insane. Then, it hit me. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. A hedge maze. Not just any hedge maze. A real, twisted, confusing labyrinth that would trap her like a rat in a cage. I could already picture it. High walls of dense, thick greenery. Endless dead ends. Tricky turns. A masterpiece of frustration. If Brenda wanted to keep using my property as her shortcut, fine. Let's see how she enjoyed getting lost in it. The next morning, I made some calls. I found the perfect landscaper, a quirky guy named Sal who specialized in fast-growing, hardy hedges. When I explained my idea, he let out a deep, hearty chuckle that shook his entire frame. "That's the pettiest thing I've ever heard," he exclaimed, wiping a tear from his eye. "I love it." And just like that, the plan was in motion. Brenda had absolutely no idea what was coming. I spent the next few days meticulously planning every detail of the hedge maze. This wasn't just going to be some simple row of bushes blocking my driveway. No, this was going to be a full-fledged labyrinth of confusion and frustration. If Brenda thought she could use my property as a shortcut, she was about to learn the hard way that some paths aren't worth taking. First, I needed the right hedges. Not just any bushes would do. I wanted something dense, fast-growing, and nearly impossible to push through. After some extensive research, I found the perfect solution: Japanese boxwood. It grew thick, could be trimmed into precise shapes, and best of all, it was known for its resilience. Once it was fully grown, it would be like running into a solid wall of green. The landscaper I hired was immediately intrigued by my plan. When I told him I needed an elaborate hedge maze instead of a simple fence, he paused for a moment, a thoughtful expression on his face, then let out a low chuckle. "I've built a lot of things in my career," he said, shaking his head with a wide grin, "but this might be the most delightfully petty project I've ever worked on." I grinned back. I need it to be effective. Confusing enough that anyone who enters won't find their way out easily. "Oh, don't you worry," he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "We'll make sure your unwanted visitor regrets ever trying to use your driveway again." The work began immediately. First, we laid out the design, carefully marking the paths and dead ends with bright orange flags. We made sure it was just complex enough to be frustrating, but not impossible to navigate for someone who was supposed to be there. The entrance would look like a normal driveway at first glance, luring Brenda into a false sense of security. But as soon as she turned in, she'd be met with a fork in the road. One path leading to a dead end, another looping her right back where she started from. From there, it only got worse. Hidden turns that appeared out of nowhere. Tight corners that would require careful maneuvering. Sudden dead ends that looked like they led somewhere but actually didn't. And just for the fun of it, a few openings that led straight back to the entrance. It would be like a living, breathing puzzle, constantly changing as the hedges grew taller and thicker. By the third day, the first section of the hedge maze was already taking shape. Sal and his crew worked fast, planting the shrubs in carefully planned patterns, leaving enough space for growth but ensuring the structure was solid from the start. Every time I walked outside to check on the progress, I could already imagine Brenda's face when she tried to take her usual shortcut and found herself trapped in a verdant nightmare. That evening, as I sipped my iced tea on the porch, I saw her pearl-white SUV roll by slowly. She hadn't attempted to use my driveway since our last explosive argument, but I could tell she was watching, waiting. She still believed the HOA would force me to take down the fence, and once they did, she'd be right back to her old ways. I just smiled to myself. Let her believe that. Let her think she had won. By the end of the week, the maze was complete. It still needed time to grow taller and fill in, but the pathways were already confusing enough to be effective. To add the final touch, I placed a small, rustic wooden sign near the entrance. Nothing too dramatic, just a simple, elegant message that read, "Shortcut closed. Welcome to the Maze of Doom." The next morning, I didn't have to wait long. I was inside, enjoying a peaceful breakfast, when I heard the familiar sound of Brenda's SUV. The low rumble of the engine. The confident way she always sped into my driveway like she owned it. Except this time, she wasn't met with an open path. There was a long, satisfying silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of tires crunching against gravel as she hesitated. I imagined her sitting in her car, staring at the maze in utter confusion, trying to process what she was looking at. Then, as I fully expected, she made the worst possible decision. She drove in. I put down my fork and walked over to the window, peeking out just in time to see her SUV disappear into the leafy depths of the hedge maze. A wide grin stretched across my face. She was inside, and she had absolutely no idea what she had just gotten herself into. At first, everything seemed normal. She drove cautiously, probably thinking I had just rearranged the landscaping and left an open path somewhere. But within seconds, I saw the first sign of panic. Her brake lights flickered as she realized she was at a dead end. She backed up, tried another path, another dead end. A few seconds later, the real fun began. She started reversing too quickly, almost hitting one of the hedges, then she lurched forward again, turning sharply, only to find herself at yet another dead end. From my window, I could just barely make out the frustrated movement of her hands on the steering wheel. Then, the horn. One loud, angry blast, followed by another. I stifled a laugh. She was honking at my hedge maze, as if it was going to magically move out of her way. A few more minutes passed, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming. Brenda had given up trying to drive. She was getting out of her car to navigate the maze on foot. Even better. I stepped outside, casually leaning against my porch railing as I watched her stomp around in utter frustration. She disappeared behind a tall hedge, then reappeared a moment later in the exact same spot she had started. She let out an angry groan, then turned another way, only to end up at the same dead end again. It was beautiful. I could see her reaching for her phone, probably to call the HOA or even the police. But there wasn't much they could do. She wasn't trespassing in the traditional sense. She had entered on her own free will, and now she was paying the price for it. After another 10 minutes of wandering aimlessly through the maze, she finally found her way out, emerging onto my driveway looking like she had wrestled a family of raccoons. Her hair was a mess, her face flushed with anger, and the second she saw me, she stormed over, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "This," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage, "is harassment." I raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Harassment, Brenda? I didn't force you to drive into the hedge maze. That was all you." Her eyes burned with pure fury. "You know exactly what you did. This is an abuse of landscaping. I'm reporting you to the HOA." I let out a low whistle. "An abuse of landscaping? That's a new one. Go ahead, Brenda, report me." She let out a frustrated growl, stomped back to her car, and sped off, leaving a trail of dust and fury in her wake. But I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't the type to let things go. She would fight this, find a way to twist the situation in her favor. But what she didn't know was that I was ready for every move she was about to make. Because this wasn't just about blocking a shortcut anymore. This was a game, and I was going to win. Brenda was not the type to let things go. I knew that the second she stormed off, her face redder than a fire hydrant. The next morning, I wasn't surprised when I opened my inbox and saw a fresh email from the HOA. Another complaint. Another demand. Another absurd accusation that made me chuckle out loud. Subject: further concerns regarding property obstruction. Dear homeowner, we have received multiple reports concerning an obstruction affecting the accessibility of neighborhood pathways. It has come to our attention that an elaborate hedge structure has been placed in a manner that disrupts natural traffic flow. Please be advised that failure to comply with HOA regulations may result in further action. It was almost comical how they were trying to dress up their blatant bias in formal language. Brenda had obviously wasted no time running straight to her HOA buddies, playing the victim and spinning some ridiculous story about how my landscaping was somehow a public safety hazard. I could already picture her standing in the HOA office, hands on her hips, demanding that they do something about the dangerous maze growing in my yard. I decided to handle it the same way I handled the last complaint, with sheer, unshakable logic. I typed back my response, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Subject: further concerns regarding property obstruction. Dear HOA Board, thank you for your concern regarding my landscaping. Please note that the hedge structure is entirely on my private property, well within legal guidelines, and is classified as a decorative landscape feature. I appreciate the HOA's dedication to neighborhood aesthetics, and I assure you that the hedge maze enhances the visual appeal of my property while respecting all zoning laws. I look forward to your response. Sincerely, Mr. Johnson. I sent it and leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee. They had no real authority over this. The HOA wasn't some supreme court of the neighborhood. They had rules, sure, but they couldn't dictate what I did on my own land, and I was going to make absolutely sure they knew that. Brenda, however, was far from done. That afternoon, I was outside, meticulously trimming some of the hedges, when I saw her standing at the end of her driveway, glaring at me like she was trying to burn holes through my skull with her laser beam eyes. I ignored her, whistling a cheerful tune as I worked, but I could feel her presence like an annoying fly buzzing in the background. Then, like clockwork, she marched over, her high heels clicking dramatically against the asphalt. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, crossing her arms over her chest. "You think you're clever, don't you?" I smiled, clipping a stray leaf. I do actually. Thanks for noticing. Her nostrils flared. The HOA is going to force you to take this stupid maze down. I shrugged, continuing to trim. Doubtful. Everything I did is within the rules. She took a deep breath, like she was trying to calm herself, then changed tactics. Look, I don't want to fight with you. Let's just be reasonable adults. The shortcut has been there for years. People rely on it. You're making things difficult for everyone. I tilted my head, considering her words. Define everyone, Brenda. Because as far as I can tell, the only person upset about this is you. Her eye twitched. You have no idea how much you're inconveniencing people. I gestured to the empty street. Oh yeah? Where's the angry mob, Brenda? Where's the neighborhood outrage? Because all I see is one person mad that she can't cut through my yard anymore. She clenched her jaw so tightly I thought her perfectly aligned teeth might crack. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed back into her house, her shoulders rigid with fury. That should have been the end of it, but Brenda wasn't built to accept defeat. The very next day, I caught her standing at the maze entrance with a pair of garden shears in her hand, ready to hack her way through like some suburban Indiana Jones. I leaned against my porch railing and watched, sipping my iced tea like I was enjoying a live performance. Brenda. I called out before she could start a leafy massacre. You might want to check the neighborhood rules about damaging someone else's property. She froze, her grip tightening on the shears. This is obstruction, she argued, though there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. I have every right. Wrong, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. That's destruction of private property. Pretty sure that's illegal. She hesitated for a moment, then huffed and stomped back inside, the shears clanging against the metal railing of her porch. But I knew she was fuming, no doubt plotting her next move. Later that evening, she escalated things in the most Brenda way possible. She called the cops. I was inside, watching a baseball game, when I saw the flashing red and blue lights through my living room window. I sighed, already knowing what was coming. Sure enough, when I stepped outside, Brenda was standing there, smug as ever, with two police officers looking mildly confused. Officers, she began, her voice dripping with false politeness, thank you for coming. I'd like to report an obstruction of community access. One of the officers, a young guy with a neatly trimmed mustache, turned to me, raising an eyebrow. Sir, what exactly is going on here? I gestured to the sprawling hedge maze. This is my driveway. Brenda used to drive through it without my permission, so I installed a hedge maze to stop her. The officer blinked, clearly trying to process this information. A hedge maze? A hedge maze, I confirmed with a nod. He looked back at Brenda, clearly trying to suppress a sigh. Ma'am, is this hedge maze on his property? She scoffed, crossing her arms. That's not the point. It's causing a disturbance. He's making it impossible for me to use the shortcut. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose, looking like he was about to develop a headache. Ma'am, do you have a legal right to use his driveway? She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing she had just walked into a leafy trap. No, I answered for her, smiling sweetly. She doesn't. The officer nodded, clearly over it. Well then, there's no crime here. It's his property. He can do what he wants with it. Brenda sputtered, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. But it's unreasonable. It's childish. He's doing this just to spite me. The officer gave her a tired look. Ma'am, being annoying isn't a crime. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing outright. Brenda, realizing she had lost yet again, crossed her arms and let out a dramatic huff that could have blown the leaves off the trees. Fine. Whatever. But this isn't over. The officers gave me a polite nod and left, Brenda still fuming as she stomped back into her house. I went inside, stretched out on my couch, and grinned up at the ceiling. The hedge maze had done its job. It had trapped her, frustrated her, and now it had even wasted her time by bringing in the cops for absolutely nothing. But I knew this wasn't over. Not with someone like Brenda. She wasn't just angry. She was desperate, and desperate people, they always made things worse for themselves. The next morning, I expected Brenda to be quiet, maybe even sulking after her spectacular failure with the police. But I had severely underestimated her ability to escalate things beyond all reason. Instead of backing down, she did what any entitled HOA tyrant would do, she went straight for the nuclear option. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, I heard a sharp knock on my front door, followed by an all too familiar voice barking orders. When I opened the door, there stood the HOA president, Mr. Henderson, a stiff-looking man in his late 60s with thinning gray hair and a clipboard tucked under his arm. Brenda stood beside him, arms crossed over her chest, an infuriation smirk plastered across her face as if she had already won some decisive victory. "Mr. Johnson," Mr. Henderson began, clearing his throat importantly, "we need to have a discussion about your landscaping choices." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Discussion? Or another attempt at forcing me to get rid of my perfectly legal maze? Brenda let out a dramatic sigh that could rival a Shakespearean tragedy. "We gave you plenty of warnings. You refused to listen." Mr. Henderson shot her a warning glance, then turned back to me. "The HOA has voted. Your hedge maze is considered an unauthorized obstruction, and we are issuing a formal demand for its removal." I stared at him, then at Brenda, who looked like she had just won an Olympic gold medal in petty neighborhood disputes. "An unauthorized obstruction?" I repeated, unable to hold back a derisive laugh. "That's interesting, because last I checked, my property isn't owned by the HOA. Mr. Henderson shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering away from mine. "Well, technically, that's true, but HOA guidelines allow us to enforce regulations that affect the overall flow and safety of the neighborhood." "Safety?" I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Please, tell me how a bunch of hedges is a safety issue." Brenda jumped in, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Oh, I don't know, maybe the fact that someone could get lost in it? Or worse, what if emergency vehicles need access? You're creating a hazard." I took a slow, deliberate breath, resisting the overwhelming urge to roll my eyes so hard they might get stuck. "Let me get this straight. You're worried about an emergency vehicle needing to use my private driveway? Because I'm pretty sure that's not how public roads work." Mr. Henderson straightened his shoulders, puffing out his chest slightly. "This isn't up for debate. You have 1 week to remove the maze, or you'll be fined." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that I knew would infuriate Brenda. "And what if I refuse?" Brenda's smirk widened, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Then the HOA will take legal action, and trust me, you don't want to go up against us." I nodded slowly, pretending to consider their dire threat. Then, without another word, I reached inside my house, grabbed a thick folder, and handed it to Mr. Henderson. He frowned, flipping it open, his expression changing almost instantly as he scanned the documents. What is this?" he stammered, his eyes wide with surprise. "Property zoning laws," I said casually, leaning against the doorframe. "City landscaping regulations. A formal statement from a lawyer confirming that since my hedge maze is decorative landscaping and doesn't exceed the city's height restrictions, it is completely legal and untouchable by the HOA." Mr. Henderson's face paled slightly as he continued to read through the documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. Brenda, on the other hand, looked like she had just swallowed a whole lemon, her face contorted in disbelief. "No," she muttered, shaking her head vehemently. "No, this isn't right. The HOA has authority only over shared spaces, Brenda," I cut in, my voice calm but firm. "Not over privately owned land, and certainly not over a hedge maze that is fully compliant with city ordinances." Mr. Henderson let out a slow breath, clearly trying to figure out a way around this unexpected legal hurdle. But there wasn't one. I had made absolutely sure of that. Finally, he closed the folder and sighed, a look of defeat washing over his face. We'll have to review this. Take your time, I said cheerfully. But just so we're crystal clear, if you try to find me over this, I will be the first to take legal action against the HOA for harassment. Brenda looked like she was about to explode, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Mr. Henderson muttered something under his breath, then turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Brenda, however, lingered, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her arms as she stared at me, her eyes burning with animosity. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. I grinned, feeling a surge of triumph. "Oh, I'm counting on that." She stomped off, her high heels clicking angrily against the pavement. I shut the door, shaking my head with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. She was furious, humiliated, and now backed into a corner. There was absolutely no way she was going to let this go, and I was right. 2 days later, I caught her outside my maze again. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had hired a landscaping company. I stepped outside just as 2 burly workers were unloading equipment from a large truck. Brenda spotted me and smirked, a smug look of satisfaction on her face. "Oh good, you're here. This will save us time." I folded my arms, my eyes narrowed. "And what exactly are you doing?" She waved a dismissive hand at the workers. "I've hired professionals to remove this mess. You had your fun, but it's time to be an adult about this." I let out a genuine laugh, shaking my head. "Wow, Brenda. You really don't get it, do you?" She turned to the workers, her voice sharp and commanding. "Go ahead, boys." One of the workers, a young man with a hesitant expression, paused, looking from Brenda to me. "Ma'am, are you the property owner?" Brenda's smugness flickered, replaced by a flash of annoyance. "I'm on the HOA board." The landscaper frowned, clearly unimpressed. "That's not what I asked." I decided to put him, and Brenda, out of their misery. "She's not the owner." I am. The workers exchanged glances, then one of them turned back to Brenda. "Yeah, sorry, ma'am, but we can't do anything without the owner's permission." Brenda's face turned an alarming shade of red, like a ripe tomato. "I am ordering you to remove this," she shrieked, her voice reaching a fever pitch. The landscaper simply shrugged, looking utterly unfazed by her outburst. "And I'm telling you, legally, I can't." I leaned against the porch railing, enjoying the show. "You should probably leave, Brenda, before I call the cops for trespassing." Brenda clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles went white. Then, in a move so unhinged I almost didn't believe it was happening, she grabbed a pair of heavy-duty hedge clippers from the truck and marched toward the maze herself, her eyes blazing with manic determination. I pulled out my phone, my finger hovering over the record button. "Great idea, Brenda. Keep going. Let's see how much damage you can do before the police get here." She froze, her grip tightening around the clippers. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I absolutely would," I said, my voice calm and steady as I turned the camera toward her. "I'm sure the cops would love to see footage of you vandalizing private property in broad daylight." For a long moment, she just stood there, her body trembling with barely contained rage, the clippers held aloft like a weapon. Then, with a guttural scream of pure frustration, she threw the clippers down onto the grass with a loud clatter and stormed back to her house, her face a mask of defeat. The landscapers, clearly not wanting any part of this neighborhood drama, quickly packed up their equipment and left. I put my phone away, smiling to myself. She had officially run out of options. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the stars twinkle in the clear night sky, enjoying the peaceful silence that had finally descended upon my little corner of the neighborhood. The shortcut was officially dead. The HOA had no power over me. And Brenda, she was out of tricks. Or so I thought. Because just when I thought the battle was finally over, she decided to do something even more desperate, and this time, she was going to make her biggest mistake yet. I should have known Brenda wasn't truly finished. She had exhausted every reasonable, and let's be honest, wildly unreasonable option. Bullying the HOA into fining me, calling the cops on a legal hedge maze, hiring landscapers to trespass, and even attempting to destroy my property herself. None of it had worked. But Brenda wasn't the type to simply admit defeat, especially when her precious ego had taken such a brutal beating. I just didn't expect her to go full-blown criminal. It happened in the dead of night. I was fast asleep, dreaming of perfectly manicured hedges and Brenda's perpetually sour face, when I heard a faint rustling sound outside. At first, I dismissed it as just the wind whispering through the leaves or maybe a stray raccoon rummaging through the trash cans. But then came the snapping sound. Sharp. Deliberate. A sound that didn't belong in the quiet stillness of the night. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum solo. Grabbing my phone from the nightstand, I quickly pulled up the live feed from my security cameras. The grainy black and white footage confirmed my worst suspicions immediately. A figure was moving through the hedge maze. Not just moving, but hacking. There was a distinct glint of metal catching the faint moonlight, the unmistakable motion of someone wildly swinging a tool. Brenda. I couldn't believe it. She was actually out there, in my yard, in the middle of the night, cutting through my beloved maze like some deranged, suburban hedge assassin. I sat there for a split second, blinking at the screen, almost impressed by her sheer, unadulterated commitment to insanity. Then, adrenaline kicked in. I threw back the covers, grabbed my jacket, slipped on my shoes, and quietly headed outside, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The second I stepped onto my porch, I heard her. Muffled curses, heavy breathing, the distinct sound of a woman completely unhinged. I followed the noise through the maze, turning corners, taking my time, a grim satisfaction growing in my chest. I knew that in her blind rage, she was making the one mistake I had been patiently waiting for. She was lost. By the time I reached the center of the maze, I found her standing in a small clearing, sweat dripping down her face, her usually perfectly coiffed hair a tangled mess. She was panting heavily, gripping a pair of heavy-duty garden shears like they were weapons, her knuckles white. All around her, there were unevenly cut sections of the hedge, the damage looking more like a wild animal had attacked than a planned act of destruction. I leaned against one of the tall hedge walls, folding my arms, a wry smile playing on my lips. Brenda? She spun around so fast she nearly tripped over a fallen branch. Her eyes went wide with a mixture of panic and fury before settling on a hard, defiant glare. This is illegal. She spat, her voice hoarse. You tricked me. I raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. Tricked you, Brenda? You broke into my yard and started hacking away at my property in the middle of the night. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her entire body shaking with barely contained rage. You forced me to do this. You left me no choice. I stared at her, utterly fascinated by the twisted logic of her entitlement. You had no choice but to trespass onto my land and commit vandalism? She blinked rapidly, as if trying to process how utterly ridiculous that sounded even to her own ears. You don't understand, she finally muttered, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. That shortcut has been there forever. You think you can just move in and take it away? I sighed, the last vestiges of amusement fading away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Brenda, it was never yours. It's my property. Her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowed into slits. This isn't over. I pulled out my phone and held it up so she could clearly see the screen. The camera app was open, the red recording light blinking steadily. Oh, I think it is. The color drained from her face. She looked from the screen to the shears clutched in her hand, then back at the towering hedge walls surrounding us, her breathing turning ragged. She was stuck. Caught red-handed, literally. There was no way out this time. And then, in true Brenda fashion, she tried to run. She took off down one of the maze's winding paths, her heavy breathing echoing through the still night air. but her own destructive efforts had only made things worse for her. In her frantic attempt to chop her way through, she had made the pathways even more confusing, creating dead ends that shouldn't have existed and twisting corners that led nowhere. It was a disaster of her own making. I followed at a leisurely pace, not rushing, letting her wear herself out. I could hear her grunting and cursing under her breath, her frustration mounting with every wrong turn. Finally, after what felt like a full 5 minutes of her running in circles, she burst out of the maze and collapsed onto my driveway, gasping for air like a fish out of water. I walked up behind her, still holding up my phone, the camera still rolling. "So," I said calmly, "should I call the cops, or do you want to do it yourself?" She groaned, rolling onto her back and staring up at the sky as if the universe had personally betrayed her. "This isn't fair," she whispered, her voice laced with self-pity. I almost felt a pang of sympathy, a tiny flicker of human decency. Almost. But then I remembered the months of relentless entitlement, the threats, the attempts to bully me, the sheer audacity of her actions. No. She had earned this. I dialed 911. By the time the police arrived, Brenda had managed to pull herself together just enough to try and play the victim. "I was confused," she told them, her voice trembling slightly. "I got lost. I didn't mean to destroy anything." I wordlessly handed one of the officers my phone, playing back the crystal-clear footage of her chopping away at my hedges with pure, unfiltered rage. The officers exchanged weary glances. One of them sighed, pulling out his handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing and property damage." Brenda's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Ma'am, we have video evidence of you cutting through this man's hedges at 2 in the morning, the officer said, his voice firm. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. For once in her life, Brenda was speechless. They cuffed her and gently guided her into the back of the squad car. As the flashing lights disappeared down the street, I let out a long, satisfied breath. The war was finally over. The next few days were glorious. The HOA, now publicly embarrassed by Brenda's arrest, scrambled to distance themselves from her. She was promptly removed from the board, her reputation in the neighborhood utterly ruined. Without her constant, entitled interference, the neighborhood actually became more peaceful. Even better, my hedge maze became something of a local attraction. Kids started using it as a play area, families came by to take pictures, and some of the neighbors even asked me for tips on how to build their own elaborate hedge structures. Then came Halloween. I had originally built the maze as a form of sweet, leafy revenge, but now it had a new purpose. I decked it out with spooky decorations, added some fog machines, and turned it into the perfect haunted maze for trick-or-treaters. People loved it. Word spread, and soon my house was the highlight of the neighborhood, the line of costumed kids stretching down the block. Brenda, on the other hand, stayed quiet after her arrest. She kept to herself, avoiding eye contact whenever she happened to pass my house. I'd sometimes see her peeking through her blinds, a shadow of her former self, but she never said a word to me again. Then, one crisp autumn night, just as I was about to turn off my porch light, I saw something that nearly made me choke on my after-dinner coffee. Brenda. Standing at the entrance of my hedge maze. She wasn't trying to destroy it this time. She wasn't trying to drive through it. She was just staring. And then, before I could even fully process what I was seeing, she took a slow, hesitant step forward and disappeared into the maze. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then, finally, I heard it. A frustrated, muffled groan from deep within the leafy labyrinth. She was lost. I smiled, shook my head, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over me, and closed my front door. Some people, it seemed, never learn. Valuable lesson: this story highlights the importance of respecting boundaries and property rights. While neighborly cooperation is valuable, entitlement and disregard for others' property can lead to significant conflict and ultimately backfire spectacularly. Sometimes, a little creative problem solving, within legal boundaries, can be a surprisingly effective way to address persistent boundary violations. What do you think of Mr. Johnson's creative solution? Have you ever dealt with a neighbor like Brenda? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more entertaining stories and life lessons.